Steve, how do you think the tuba has shaped your life?
Well, first of all, I started playing tuba around the age of 14. I was in year 8, 8th grade in the United States. That's junior high. And before then, I wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force. And then when I got into year 12 in high school, I was better at tuba than I was at the academics around engineering or whatever you would need to become a military pilot. I was accepted at the University of Arizona as an aerospace engineering major on a music scholarship, not an academic scholarship. Then I thought, my calling is a little bit tuba. And when I got the curriculum for the College of Engineering, it didn't look very fun. It looked pretty mundane. And I was listening to Wagner operas. I was being introduced to Mahler. I was playing in a university orchestra. I was playing in the All-State Orchestra. And then I just knew that I had to go for the tuba. It was just a calling. And the thing about the tuba, it's really big, as you know, and it creates a lot of vibrations. And there's some sort of a physical vibrational frequency that I just love to make and be involved with. So it was no problem for me to sit in a practice room for 10 hours a day and just play the tuba and practice. Just loved it. And how did it shape me? When I went to Arizona State then to major in music, my teacher told me, Steve, young man, do you realize that there are only 20 orchestras in the United States that pay a living, full-time living, for an orchestral tuba player? 20. And he said, there are 100 positions for senator, U.S. senator. You have five times more chance to become a U.S. senator. How bad do you want it? I said, I want it, and I'm an honest guy. I don't want to be a senator. No, I'm kidding. So how did it shape me? Well, that got me to Arizona State, and what a lot of American brass players, a bit of a strategy that we were sort of taught by our teachers was, if you can't get a job here, you can get a job in Europe or another country. And of course, my goal was to get a major orchestra job in the United States, and I accomplished that. I was offered a position with the San Antonio Symphony. I won that audition, which at the time was in the top 20, I think. Also, just before that, I won a job with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. And how did that happen? After playing with the Civic Orchestra of Chicago one summer, when I just finished university, I got a phone call from a friend saying, hey, Sydney is open. And when a tuba player calls the other and says, City is open, that means that there's an audition for that orchestra. And that also means that if you want to live in a particular city in the world, American cities, Australian cities, if you're a tuba player, you got one shot. That's it. So by winning the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, it brought me here to Australia. Otherwise, I possibly would have never come here. And in the meantime, while the ABC at the time, who was the employer of the SSO musicians, was sorting out the legalities of my visa, I was able to work in Europe for a year, and I won an audition for the Torino Radio Symphony Orchestra in Italy, and that brought me there. The tuba also brought me into the World Youth Orchestra at age 23, so this happened just before going to Italy and then coming to Australia, where I was able to tour Scandinavia, live in Sweden for most of the summer, and perform for the first time in the Concertgebouw, Royal Concertgebouw of Amsterdam. And I guess as a musician, like a lot of musicians, our world travels and our experience of life outside of our birth country, our birth state, is sort of dictated and determined by the musical opportunities that we receive.
So, going back, we've jumped through university and early employment opportunities, but how did the tuba choose you?
The tuba chose me in a way that was the only thing I think I was good at playing, to be honest.
But did someone put the tuba in your hands? Or
pretty much.
Or did you start off on the cornet?
Pretty much. I was a trumpet player from year 4 in primary school, elementary school. I never made a very good sound. My lips would hurt. And the other kids would beat me for first chair in the junior high band and even in elementary school. And I didn't feel like I was good at it. And then I moved to trombone and euphonium. And that was more comfortable, but I didn't like the feeling of this trombone slide. That didn't make any sense to me. I wanted to push something down to get a note. The euphonium was nice, but there was something about the resonance of it and maybe the repertoire that just didn't do anything for me. I was playing in the junior high band at the time. Band director said, "We've just got a tuba." And there it was on the shelf, this big shiny thing. He said, "Who wants to play it? Who wants to learn to play the tuba?" And I raised my hand.
Yes.
And the band director said, "No, not you, because you're one of our 2 leading trumpet players." And I said, "But I think we need to have equal strength on the bottom of an ensemble as the top." And he looked at me like, here's this 14-year-old kid talking about the solid foundation. Then I got a lesson after school, like, this is how you hold it, this is what you put down for these notes, and this is how you breathe. And I played that thing, and I just felt so good. And I was already a good tuba player. It was just the hand of the glove or whatever. It was just a fit. And something my dad told me was that his professor at university was a low brass instructor. My dad was a trombonist. And my dad was told that by his teacher, that he has the natural jaw structure that resonance-wise or whatever is suited for the tuba. And apparently I've inherited that. So playing low on the tuba, playing expressive on the tuba, and getting around has never been a challenge for me as far as getting started. And then when it came to going to a really good teacher with other good students and putting the same amount of work, it was sort of this feeling that this is the only thing I can do really, really, really well. Or this is what I do best.
Yes.
So
yeah.
the instrument chose me.
So you said your father was a musician, your mother? Was she a musician as well? Or?
Yes. My mother taught piano.
Yes.
So I started learning piano
Yes.
in year 3 of primary school, elementary school. And then in year 4 I started trumpet. And then
And do you remember listening to much music when you were very young? I mean, was music, music must have been part of the household.
Yes. My parents are both music teachers.
Yes, I know, but I mean, so many people these days don't seem to listen to any music at all, other than what they happen to have come across at school, so you're at such an advantage, aren't you?
That's right.
Do you remember were the favourite pieces back then that you enjoyed listening to?
Tchaikovsky 4, 5, and 6.
That's
as a young kid, like I don't know, 8 or 9 years old.
Yes. So you came to Sydney and you joined the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, and you. I think going back to my first question about how much the tuba shaped your life, I think maybe if you had played the cello, you might not have been so imaginative with all the other things that you do. You might not have been so entrepreneurial with all the other things that you do, because your life was sort of, as a tuba player, you're not required in everything. And
That's correct.
I interviewed the tuba player from the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, and he said, he spent a lot of time observing conductors because you get a lot of extra time, So I guess that's where I was coming from with that question. So you were playing in the orchestra, and of course it was a steep learning curve as you worked your way through the repertoire. But then you started doing all sorts of other things as well, didn't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Let's talk about those other things before we go back to the SSO. So when did you start Tuba Mania, for instance?
Tuba Mania started in in the early 90s. So I joined the orchestra in 1990. And I started teaching right away. ANU, Australian National University, Sydney Conservatorium of Music, when I was in my 20s, was like the tuba teacher, became the tuba teacher. And the students did not have audition-winning instruments. They had traditional instruments from the community bands, which are great in the community bands, but would not stand up generally to an international competition. And so what I wanted to do with my new tuba studio here of my students, who are all like 3, 4, 5 years younger than me at the time
That's
when I
right.
started. I wanted them to have the best instruments, and I wanted them to go over to Europe and the United States for the international solo competitions, and I wanted them to win the next auditions here in Australia, and I wanted them to win jobs abroad, because I came to Australia as an American, and I wanted to pay that back by grooming Australians to get jobs in other countries. So the first step was to get the right instruments. And so I went to the manufacturers who made my instruments, and with the manufacturers, we came up with a little shop, or a little store, as you would, called Tuba Mania, where my students, or eventually students of the other teachers around the country, can say, hey, Steve, my student is now in second year, is going to audition for this and that, and wants a professional level tuba, can you help them out? So I started an importing business called Tuba Mania, where
And where did these tubas come from? Japan?
mainly Germany,
Oh, Germany.
mainly Germany, some in Switzerland, but primarily Germany.
Right.
And then we decided to make a tuba festival around this. And I asked the manufacturers, I said, would you sponsor the top artists of these instruments to go to Australia and teach and mentor the Australian tuba students? So in 1995, we had the first Tuba Mania in Sydney, and I think we had something like 200 participants. And I invited every professional tuba player from the Australia-New Zealand region. We had a competition. We had a Frenchman won, a Hungarian came second, an Australian came third. That was the first Tuba Mania, and then Yamaha and some of the instruments made in Japan and countries outside of Germany became involved. And then I started running Tuba Mania festivals nearly every year until just 2 or 3 years ago.
And what's the connection with Bangkok? You run something in Bangkok as well, don't you?
That's right.
Yes.
I did. We had Tuba Mania festivals ran in Bangkok. Oh, when did we start? We started 2006, and the last one was 2019. The reason for that is when my older kids grew up and went to university, they went to Europe. And so I then got a position in Europe as well as assistant professor in Zurich at the University of the Arts. And on one of those trips in the earlier days, I got a message from somebody who worked in an Australian university who has a connection in Bangkok saying that we would like you to do a master class in Thailand. It was called MIFA, the International Music Academy, called MIFA somehow.
Yes.
And I remember doing that and met the tuba player of the Bangkok Symphony. And he said to me, anytime you go to Europe, can you stop in Thailand on the way? And back in those days, the airline that I was using was Thai Airways. So every time I would fly to Europe, not every time I fly to Europe, but about once a year or every 2 years, I would do some master classes. Then the head of brass at one of the universities there at Silpakorn asked me, hey, can we do a Tuba Mania together in Thailand at my university? And so, long story short, we ended up sharing it around the universities in Bangkok. We did it at Silpakorn, Chulalongkorn, and Mahidol 2 times. They got bigger and bigger and bigger. Then it got to the point where I decided, hey, I really would like to run this myself. And I wanted to give the Western students coming from Europe and Australia, the United States, an experience of life in general beyond just going to, I don't want to say an institution, but a university, a music faculty, and being in the practice rooms. So what did we do? We rented a houseboat on the River Kwai. And I brought out Dan Panantoni, Roger Bobo, Aniela Visser, and we've had a lot of professionals from regional Southeast Asia be involved. And we would put 20, 30 men and women on these boats, on this houseboat, and we would go up and down the River Kwai. We did our scales, our fundamentals, breathing, meditation, and teaching them about the different culture. We had probably a third of the participants were Thai, so they were able to have a bit of a cultural exchange on like anywhere from what does hard work mean to you and what is happiness for you, and we're all citizens of the world, so let's share these ideas. Then you can all go back to your home country and maybe apply something that you've learned from somebody who has different experiences, different culture you can put into your life, which then might come into your music. And we also found that having it in Thailand made it very affordable for everybody, because if they were to come to our resort on the river and come on our houseboat, the European students and the Asian students would pay probably 10 or 20% as what they would pay in a Sydney hotel or a Zurich hotel, for example. So that's the reason and the history behind Tuba Mania in Thailand.
You see, this shows an extraordinary inventive mind. Now, playing it in an orchestra, it requires all sorts of skills, but has it given you the time to let your very creative mind sort of run riot as well? I mean, do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Do you think that because I mean there are times when you're not playing as many notes as the second violins, you know, so you've got time. You're immersed in this wonderful sound that you can think of the next. So it must be wonderful living in your mind, I think. Steve. Do you feel that?
Yes, it does. It does give us a chance to be creative, but I always tell people that being a tuba player in an orchestra is a lot like being the specialist kicker on a football team, where you might be sitting on the sidelines for maybe half the game or 2/3 of the game or even maybe 90% of the game. But when it comes time to take that field and make that kick, it could be the difference of the whole game. And with my tuba ears, whenever I go to hear other orchestras, I notice that when the tuba comes in, the undertones and the overtones are so powerful and it's so broad. It's like a big carpet underneath the orchestra that it can change the sound and direction of the entire orchestra. Now, I know a timpanist might argue with that, say, no, it's my job, but I would say that the tuba is equally as important as any other instrument in the orchestra when it's playing, and same as the kicker, we've got to be on mental alert and ready to go. Difference between the kicker is maybe they don't know when they're going to be called on. We know we're tossed at this movement, and then we rest for 20 minutes, and we come in and play something big or something higher, something technical, but we've got to have a strategy in place that these are going to work as if we're still warmed up and that our focus is 100%. So in concerts, I'm completely in the mind of the composer and the conductor and the colleagues. And I'm not daydreaming. I'm not being creative more than what I can give there. In the rehearsals, especially in the earlier rehearsals, first run through goes fine, my part. Then that's when the creative drifting part might come. So a few years ago, we said, next festival, maybe in Singapore or Hong Kong. By the way, we ran 5 Tuba Manias in Hong Kong as well. And these ideas would come up during the rehearsals. And absolutely being in the creative environment of sitting in an orchestra rehearsal, the creative juices start flowing and, I've got an idea.
That's wonderful. So with all of the thousands of works that you played, what are the sort of your favourite pieces from the tuba repertoire that you just love beyond belief?
In the orchestra, I would say my overall favourite's got to be Prokofiev. And if anybody studies Prokofiev and researches what Prokofiev's favorite instrument was, it's the tuba. And Prokofiev seems to use the tuba more than other composers of his time. And it just goes on and on, whether it be his symphonies, his ballets, film scores. Alexander Nevsky, Lieutenant Kijé are two that come to mind. Is just absolutely incredible. The way he uses the colors of the tuba with the winds, with the strings. And the tuba's, I think in Prokofiev's 5th Symphony, the tuba's playing twice as much as the trombones are. And the trombones will drop out and the tuba keeps playing. And I love that. I love that.
Yes. Now, you mentioned how the quality of the tubas weren't great when you first arrived here in Australia. So, first of all, do you own a range of tubas? Or have you got a favourite one that you just use most of the time?
I basically use one tuba for about 90% of the work, and then I also have a smaller tuba that I'll use for something that might be contemporary and high or earlier, such as Hector Berlioz, where it was originally written for ophicleide. And I've also got a German B-flat tuba that I use that's anything Wagnerian from the Ring. And then, of course, with the Russian music, it's going to be a choice between the C or the B-flat, depending on the repertoire. So to answer your question, I've got 3 tubas, but I use one of those probably 90% of the time.
And do tubas have a long life?
They do. The good ones last as long as me.
Right.
They'll last as long as me, as long as I look after it. They last a lifetime.
And it seems to be with all instruments that if you were to line up 10 identical tubas, they all have a different personality. Would that be the same for tubas?
It sure is. And the tubas that I play are handmade. And I think the statistic was the tuba maker who makes my instruments said that's an average of 300 hours of hand labor into one instrument. And this is the, sort of, they're still using the old school, old-fashioned way where they fill the bow with lead and then they heat it up and they're tapping. Like, you go into these tuba factories, it's like going back in time 40, 50 years in with Santa's elves making things. They're tapping and then now, of course, they've got the technology to measure things digitally and make molds and things like that. But at the end of the day, they're going to do the fine work by hand. So which means that when they say, oh, we've got 5 of these instruments ready, I will need to go to the factory and play them because they'll all be slightly different. And it's like identical twins. They're not exactly the same. They might seem the same, but they're not. And these handmade instruments are like this. And I understand it's quite similar to string instruments and woodwind as well.
Yes, it's one of the magical things about an instrument. Now, we've talked about the orchestral repertoire, but you've also been very involved in playing a lot of new music, written especially for you and so on. And playing, I know you played a lot with David Miller in recent years and so on. So tell me about some of those pieces that you've been responsible for their birth, if you like.
Well, when it comes to commission, the pieces that I've commissioned, I've commissioned them for one of 2 different reasons. One is to have better repertoire out there for the students, the amateurs, and the developing players. So I didn't want to have all these really hard pieces written that only Steve can play or Steve would want to spend the hours learning. I'm going to mention one example. Brennan Collins wrote a piece for me called The Love of 3 Apples. And it is now like AMEB's #1 choice for an Australian composition. It's beautiful. The mothers love it. The pianists love it. The tuba players love it. The people adjudicating, love it. It's simple enough to play, but it's very challenging. Even myself, I recorded it for YouTube. There's no end to the musical challenges and the nuances that you can put into that. So that's one side. And the other side would be specific for an event like one of the Tuba Mania festivals, or I organized 2 festivals here in Sydney International Brass Festival, 2013 and 2014. Hey, there's the American Horn Quartet is coming. Great. Hey, Andrew Batterham, would you write me a piece for solo tuba and 4 horns? And hey, we've got Tim Busby from the Melbourne Symphony, his wife Jessica, and Sergio Carolino from Portugal. Whoa, here's a piece. 4 soloists accompanied by, let's see, a trombone ensemble with percussion. Let's do that specifically for the event. So then, again, Batterham wrote this piece, and he said, oh, it's Steve Rossé, Tim Busby, Jessica Busby, and Sergio Carolina. It's going to be the 4 Immortals. And Steve, you're going to be Zeus. And so there's a whole, like a little tone poem. And I said to him, no more than 13 minutes, 14 minutes, please, because we want to have an experience and then to have people maybe wanting a little bit more, but we don't want to, I'm not one of these kind of people who's going to commission a 55-minute tuba concerto, for example.
you got things into perspective. Now, with your teaching, you've now been teaching for a very long time. You've only stopped recently teaching at the City Conservatorium. But how did your teaching evolve? Because when you started teaching, you weren't much more than 24 or so, were you?
That's right.
Yes.
When I came here, I was 25 and started teaching right away. The students were successful. They were winning right away, started winning jobs and big jobs like Leipzig Gewandhaus, and I've had students play the Berlin Philharmonic and the London Philharmonic. And I just, I don't want to say I'm a natural teacher, but I was always able to identify that the student is not the same as me, and what worked for me and what works for me does not necessarily work for them. So as I developed as a teacher, I was basically collecting data. And so when a student would have an issue or they would have a challenge, I would say to them like, let's try it this way. This works for like 80-90% of the students that I've worked with. Let's see if it works for you. And guess what? There'd be an 80-90% chance that it would work for them. And if it worked for them, then we keep going. And every once in a while someone say, hey Steve, I see that your lip goes like this and this one goes like that, and should I do that? I say, no, don't do that. It only works for me, but the way my embouchure looks is not the picture embouchure you want to have. And so I would guide them, in a sense, I would guide them to find their innermost potential and genius that they have and bring out the best in them, however it took. And part of that was by resourcing other teachers to come and work with me in teaching with these students, and taking them to a houseboat in Thailand and working with 2 or 3 of the great teachers from the United States and Europe as well, or bringing them around Australia, or inviting the other studios from Australia here and working with the other teachers, because myself as a teacher, I'm always learning, and if I don't learn something in a day as a teacher, I'm not growing. And I have this saying that if we're not moving forward, we're moving backwards. So I just want to thank all my students for my development as a teacher
and as a person, I think too.
Yes,
now, just a sort of quirky question. You obviously have spent your life travelling with the tuba. How do you manage that? I mean, how do the airlines cope? Do you sort of hide it behind the check-in counter and say,
Well, I don't travel with tubas anymore.
Right.
I don't travel with tubas anymore, and the reason for that is the one part of being a tuba player that I just did not like was going to the airport, and you can't even put it on the weight scale, and they go, oh, what have you got in there? And you've paid $3,000 or $4,000 for the best protective case, and you've wrapped it in bubble wrap and egg, things like that, and the only way they'll take it is if you sign a release saying that is unsuitably packed. Anyway, this is how it goes for a tuba player. And then you go to you carry it over there, and then you have to pay extra, and then you can't take anything else.
Yes. You
can't take anything else. So, long story short, the way I negotiated it was everything that I would take would need to go into a 7-kilogram backpack. That's it. And then everything else, I would just have to deal with it. And then the tuba would be the piece of luggage. And I mentioned I don't travel anymore with the tuba. And how this started was just before flying to Tuba Mania Hong Kong in 2019, which is the last one we did. Last Tuba Mania Thailand and Hong Kong were both in 2019. The organizer called me that morning. He said, Steve, just letting you know, we've had to cancel the final concert. So you're not going to do your recital. Instead, we're going to do a competition. There were some political things going on in Hong Kong at the time, which meant no recital. We couldn't get a hold to do recital. And I just went, great. So I'm going to go on the plane, go to Tuba Mania without a tuba. And he said, and I've got 3 tubas here for you to teach, and they are the same tubas that you own. I've sourced them. Great. And then I came back from that trip and I said to myself, I'm not ever flying with a tuba again. And then I realized that I have been an international soloist for the last 25 years, and I think I'll graduate from that. And then when the orchestra tours, they take my tuba for me. And I've been asked to play with some other orchestras outside of Sydney after 2019, and I basically said no. because I don't want to borrow your tuba
Yes.
and play with an orchestra I don't know, and with a tuba I don't know. I would rather stay home and work on my online tuba course, or do my work on my mindset coaching business. So I have not traveled with the tuba since then. And people say, yeah, but you live in Adelaide. How does that work? The tubas stay in Sydney. And when I'm in Adelaide, I have a mouthpiece that I practice on, which I live most of the time, and then so I'm dedicating that time to the mindset coaching.
So that leads. So that actually was I thought was just a sort of quirky, silly question, but that was actually a very interesting, very interesting answer. So that leads beautifully into the new Steve that you've created for yourself, and I want you to talk. I don't want to just talk about where you are now. I want to talk about the process, how you got there, because this is actually what it's all about, isn't it? Really?
Absolutely.
Yes.
A little bit of a background. In 2018, I played with the Concertgebouw Orchestra for a half a year. I did have to audition for that position. People saw it as a job swap between myself and their tuba player, but what happened is we both took time off. He was able to come play here. Our conductor at the time knew him, so that was fine. They didn't know me, so I had to take the audition. And then I was sort of triggered and was going through some of these performance anxieties and nerves, imposter syndrome that I had experienced before and was able to survive through to have the career I've had, and came up with some strategies and realized that I'm at the point in my musical development where I need to study the mind more than playing the instrument. I can play the instrument, no problem. I can win an audition anywhere on the planet. But this made it really unenjoyable, stressful, anxiety. I had a successful audition, and I got the position. Then I learned there that they've got mindset coaching support within the orchestra, somewhere of the equivalent of like one full-time and a half-time psychiatrist, performance psychologist, whatever it is, however they resource this. And I talked to some of the other musicians of the orchestra. They said, yeah, it's a real thing. I remember going to Carnegie Hall to do Bruckner 9 and Mahler 1 with Gatti, my second week there, and I was having a bit of a tea and coffee in the Amsterdam airport before getting on the plane to New York. And I said to them, do any of you at this level experience like performance anxieties or nerves? And he just says, all the time. You know what this is like? We're going to Carnegie Hall. We're going to have a camera in our face. The Cleveland Orchestra was there the week before. The Vienna is going to be the next week playing the same repertoire. And yeah, it's like walking through a minefield. It's everything, the mindset. And then that musician was talking about the support they had within the orchestra. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a real thing. I want to study this. And it got to the point where I thought, I'll leave the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, go to university and get a degree in psychology and become a psychiatrist for musicians. Then COVID happened. And I enrolled in everything I could mindset-wise that I thought would help musicians. So I got, over 2 years, a certificate for in life coaching, because if you don't have your life together, your musical life might not be together either. Professional coaching, and then neuro-linguistic programming, which is, if anybody is familiar with Don Green and the Inner Game of Music, Timothy Galloway, I believe it's the Inner Game of Tennis, that's all sort of basic beginning points of neuro-linguistic programming. I ended up studying NLP and being certified with a protege of the founder who founded it. It was founded in the 80s. And I said, gee, and part of my research project, it was a bit like a university course to get through this. I had to do a research project, the whole bit. And my research project was how NLP can help musicians with performance anxiety, imposter syndrome, just the jitters, audition nerves. And my David Bullis, my NLP trainer, said, I haven't heard or I can't even think of how NLP can help musicians. And in my research, I was researching how NLP helps the athletes. So peak performance for the athlete, not the technical part of kicking the ball or throwing the javelin or whatever, the mindset really intrigued me. So I started studying quite intensively with the mindset coaching for the high performance athletes, came across some NLP, but not much for musicians. So to make a long story short, when I graduated from the Life Coaching Academy, graduated from the Neuro-Linguistic Programming training, submitted my research project. It was a video, PowerPoint video, on how NLP can help musicians. It went to Paris, and I was asked, not only was I given my certification for professional coaching, NLP practitioner and life coaching, I was also asked to teach and mentor at the Life Coaching Academy with NLP. And I thought, no, I want to help my musicians. We were in lockdown, and I just went on Facebook and started advertising. Hey, announcing on my feed, hey, I've got this certificate in neuro-linguistic programming. Anybody want to try this coaching? And they started coming and having success and winning jobs. And to make a long story short, then I got coaching on how to create this as a business. I left the conservatory to focus on that, and then I was nearly ready to leave the orchestra as well because the coaching was full-time. People would ask me, so when the lockdown finishes and the SSO comes back, what are you going to do? I don't know. I don't know. So I got coaching on that. So I have mindset coaches as well. Then I became a master NLP coach practitioner, and I took it a step further and realized that a lot of people coming into my program, I wouldn't say a lot, but a high percentage, maybe a third or so, have got anxieties and traumas, like almost a PTSD type trauma from music. So let's say, oh, it's that conductor in that piece, I can't play, and they have a trigger and they call in sick. And this is global, by the way. This is not specific to any person or any orchestra, but I think every orchestra probably has a few of these people. So I studied timeline therapy to help people alleviate trauma of the past. And so now I combine the therapy, the coaching, and the mentoring to help musicians. And it is full-time. I have 40 clients on my books now, and am coaching at least with the one-on-ones or the groups. It's 15 to 20 hours a week. And so when I am in Sydney playing with the SSO, I only give sessions to my platinum members, because in my coaching program, the top 20% are in my platinum program. So I'm able to serve them on a weekly basis while I'm here in Sydney. And then when I'm in Adelaide, it's my platinums, and then my signature system members can have their one-on-one coaching sessions. And no matter where I am in the world, every week they get 90 minutes of a group coaching session, video learning library, whatever they need to get them to their next step.
And you just could not have done this if it wasn't for online.
That's right.
Yes.
It's all online. It's all online.
Do you remember giving your first online tuba lesson?
I do. I remember learning how to use Zoom in 2020 when the lockdown happened, and we got an email from the SSO saying we're going to have a meeting on Zoom. And I just went, Zoom? This is too hard. I learned how to download the app, and I think I ended up joining that meeting 45 minutes late. And I can't remember being even more frustrated about anything in my entire life. Oh, this is terrible, Zoom. And then at the same time, I was already using Skype. Now that took me quite a while to learn how to use, which was before COVID. I was doing Skype for the Life Coaching Academy. Oh, I have to do Skype, okay. And then I'll never forget my first life coaching session as a client. And my coach was David Bullis, also my trainer. And he said, so, I had already sent some preliminary paperwork. We had an idea of what we were going to work on. He said, let's start with your limiting beliefs. I said, I don't have any. He said, tell me what you think about putting yourself out there on Facebook and doing things by Zoom and Skype. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I want to build a coaching career by referrals and word of mouth. And he said to me, why is that? And then I told him my views of of all the online stuff. And he says to me, that is a limiting belief. You are going nowhere until we change this belief. Now, I live for Zoom. I live more on Zoom than anywhere else, and Facebook is the primary platform. Facebook and Zoom are the two platforms for my whole coaching business.
At what point did suddenly Zoom become a friend? Because it must have been a revelation when suddenly you realised what it could do for Steve.
Yeah, it became a friend when I became a client in another coaching program, and they said, oh, we have regular Zoom group meetings. Here's the link. And I had already downloaded the app, and I'd been already creating an online course and using Facebook. So at this point, I'm friends with technology. I'm friends with the internet. This is all cool. And then click. Oh, this is easy. Oh, this is nice. And then as part of this program to build my business, we were required to get our own Zoom account. And now I'm the Zoom operator. Other coaches reach out to me to ask them how to use it.
Look, I'm going to ask you the question. Where do you think you will be in 5 years' time? Because I think you probably asked that question to your clients. So where do you think you're going to be in 5 years' time, Steve?
In 5 years, I plan to be doing exactly what I'm doing now, but bigger and better. So I still plan to be involved with the Sydney Symphony the way I am, and my coaching program will probably have grown tenfold by then. And what I mean by tenfold is I'm getting more and more people coming to me from some of the high-end international orchestras and conductors, and the next steps for me are to start working as a client with some of these high-end athletic performance mindset coaches. Ben Crow is one that comes to mind, and the other is the peak performance mindset coaches who work with the AFL, and to coordinate how they work with their high-end athletes, and for me to work with my clientele. And I'm also developing a new program now. It's called M4C, Mindset for Confidence Diamond, where I'm starting to work with conductors. And the conductors who are approaching me, I just had one, I'm not going to mention any names, but one of the big major orchestras of Australia just reached out to me and said, hey, Steve, this mindset coaching thing is, it looks really interesting. What would it take for, and then I'll just keep it confidential. And so we're going to have a conversation, and another one just called me for advice. He said, hey, I'm in a situation here, career-wise, I should say they, because it could be man or woman, anybody. Yeah. And it's really exciting that it will be very soon that I'm going to be able to announce the conductors that I am working with right now, and they are quite high-end. And one of my mentors is Ben Crow, who coaches Ash Bari,
yes.
the tennis player. And I thought, wow, in 5 years, I would like to do what Ben is doing for his tennis players. I would like to do that for high-end conductors. Because the reason for that is in the mindset coaching, I coach tuba players, clarinet players, string players, harp players. But when I'm coaching a conductor, I'm in their mind, and it's all-inclusive. It's every instrument, it's the composer, it's the passion, it's the career path, it's the, fun and games and politics, it's agents. I've conducted this orchestra and I haven't been asked back, why? And then, okay, let's work on this. And for me, that is completely life-giving. So to answer your question, 5 years, I'm going to be that coach.
That's terrific. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Such an interesting interview.
Thank you.